Good morning. My name is PJ Babb, and I have been teaching social studies in Ohio since 1999, and I have been involved with the We the People program since the 2006-2007 school year. And getting started can be very overwhelming and intimidating, but I would like to assure you that the benefits far outweigh initial fears of starting the program. I believe this program is worthwhile because it provides a very unique educational experience for my students. Not only do they learn a lot about social studies, American history, American government, they're able to apply their knowledge and they learn a lot about themselves. They're able to problem solve and work with other students, and they're also able to present their information to professionals in a community setting. So the experience is very comprehensive. It's not just about learning material and being able to show it on a test. They're able to perform and apply the knowledge that they have gained. And I believe that if you are interested, that you should seek more information and become involved with the program, because it is very, very beneficial to our students. It helps them become citizens that can contribute, and they understand the process of living in a democracy. As you will see on the video, the students' culminating activity after they have mastered the curriculum is to testify in a congressional hearing. The first part of the hearing requires the students to answer a 4-minute prepared response to a question that they know ahead of time. So the students are prepared for this part of the hearing, and they work together with their team to deliver that to the judges. That part is what they will know ahead of time coming into the competition.
Welcome, and thank you for coming today. We're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Rachel Wilson. I'm the Program Director of the Law and Leadership Institute.
Hi, I'm Chris Roday. I'm the Ohio State Bar Association Committees and Section Coordinator. Thank you for coming.
I'm John Hochter. I'm the Publications Editor here at the Ohio State Bar Association.
I'm Julian Carroll.
I'm Shelby Kitchen.
I'm Tony Ray Hanley.
And I'm Cody Wass.
We're starting with question 1. The Declaration of Independence has been described as the most revolutionary political statement in American history. What new ideas about government and its purposes are set forth in the Declaration, and why might they be considered revolutionary? What principles expressed in the Declaration are traceable to John Locke and other natural rights philosophers? Why do you think the Declaration is one of the most imitated or copied documents in the world today?
The Declaration of Independence is regarded as a remarkable document that has been the inspiration for many other nations. Since it is our founding document, it is both the product and impetus of revolution. The ideas presented in it were of a higher magnitude than those previously used. Radical ideas such as John Locke's natural rights helped make the Declaration the most innovative and imitated document in history. The Declaration sets forth many of the more radical thoughts of government of the time. In a world dominated by absolute despotism, the Declaration included ideas more related to a republic, a system of government not used on a large scale since Rome. First off, the fact that the colonists believed they could repudiate the sovereignty of the throne was a massive change in traditional thinking of the time. Monarchs ruled with divine right. To reject this meant rejecting God's will in the eyes of the monarch. Since the colonists believed the crown was violating their rights instead of protecting them, their actions for independence were justified. The Declaration states that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the governed. It also states that the government gains power and legitimacy from the people, not an absolute monarch claiming just power.
This can be compared to the preamble of the Constitution when it states "We the People." This demonstrated more radical ideas like popular sovereignty and the social contract theory. The Declaration also includes a list of grievances they tried to have written correct, but to no avail. Speaking out against the government is now protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution, which was undoubtedly inspired in part by this list of complaints. Finally, the founders included that all men are created equal and that they all have inalienable rights. This was not the case in Britain, where most lower-class citizens had no representation in government. These ideas all went against traditional thought. They outright falsified absolute despotism, which was one of the most common forms of government in the 18th century. They also formed the basis of the ideals on which this country was founded, as many of the same rights claimed by the founders in the Declaration were also present and stressed in the Constitution. Most of the ideas in the Declaration originated from naturalized philosophers like Hobbes and Locke. Unalienable rights references Locke's naturalized philosophy, where all men have the right to life, liberty, and property. These rights are gained at birth and were later protected by the 5th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. Most Enlightenment thinkers think that it is the duty of the government to protect our rights, but in order to do so, we have to agree to the government to give up others.
This is a part of the social contract theory, an Enlightenment idea discussed by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Essentially, citizens give up a portion of their rights to an authority in return for security. Hobbes believed that people created governments to avoid a dangerous state of nature. Pre-revolutionary America was headed down a path towards this very same state of nature due to a newfound colonial interest in American affairs. In Hobbes's view, this was because the people demanded a new government to avoid the fear and anarchy associated with new government. Finally, as the colonists were still citizens of the British Crown, they demanded the rights of man, as outlined by William Blackstone.
The Declaration is one of the most copied documents in history due to its basic interpretation of all the rights people should have. In addition, it also shows the audacity necessary to speak out against the government, but that it is also necessary to gain the rights. For example, shortly after the American Revolution, France revolted in a bloody rebellion. The Declaration, along with the natural rights philosophy in general, inspired the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The latter assertion was an iconic document and outlined the same fundamental laws and individualism as the Declaration stressed. Its revolutionary ideas formed the basis of many revolutions and usurpations around the globe. This document was flint and steel on parchment as it amalgamated and applied many different Enlightenment ideas. Along with it inspired other societies to do as the same as the colonists. Throw off the bindings of oppressive government and secure basic rights and self-government.
Thank you very much.
Once the students have finished their 4-minute prepared speech, they will then go to follow-up cross-examination, where the judges will ask the panel a series of questions. This is the more challenging part of the congressional hearing because the students and the teacher do not know what questions to expect. I believe that once the students have mastered the curriculum, they will be able to apply their knowledge, but some good spots to start would be maybe some of the what do you think questions in each of the units. Those are good opinion questions and require the students to answer in depth or apply the subject matter. I think that current events are always good. If your students are aware of current events, they can come up with examples when they're answering questions. I think anything in their opening statement, if they mention a court case or they mention a primary source or an example, a historical example or contemporary, the judges could ask follow-up questions on that part. There's really no set way to prepare for this part. And I do think with more experience as a teacher, you are better able to understand what types of questions the judges may ask. But it's really hard to prepare. You just have to do your best in looking at the subject matter and what might be some follow-up extension questions. And this is the part of the competition or the hearing that is most beneficial. And I think that this is the part where the students can really shine by showing what they know.
Now we're going to ask some follow-up questions. Evaluate the right of revolution as set forth in the Declaration.
The colonists believed that they were able to revolt because their rights weren't being protected properly by the government. They thought that a government was only legitimate when it was protecting the rights of its citizens, and that it shouldn't be taking rights just for the sake of taking rights, only to protect other rights.
When the colonists drafted the Declaration, they were basically saying it is our right to revolt. They also included a list of grievances so that they weren't revolting for no reason. They had a reason to go against the monarchy.
They had to revolt after a long train of abuses, which is what the founders wanted to put forward in the Constitution.
So I have a question. To whom is the Declaration addressed, and why do you think the drafters were attentive to the opinions of mankind?
The Declaration was addressed to Great Britain, but it was also addressed to the rest of the world. For example, the French in particular helped us drastically in the Revolutionary War.
Recognition by other nations is a vital part of sovereignty, so the founders had to make sure that they were justifying America's independence. If they didn't justify it, other nations wouldn't recognize us, and we wouldn't be a country in the eyes of the world.
I think they were attentive to all the opinions of the people because they had just come over from Great Britain, and they were trying to escape all the rule from the monarch there. So,
Okay, another follow-up question. Why was the term sovereignty a disputed matter between Great Britain and the colonists?
In Britain, or in all of Europe, sovereignty resided with the monarch, where it was invested by God. And the colonists believed that sovereignty was derived by mandate of the masses. So to the British, breaking from the crown was breaking from God's will. But to the Americans, the crown dominating the people was violating their sovereignty.
The colonists sought a form of government that was more republic. They did not believe in a monarchy, such as in Great Britain.
The Declaration of Independence often is called American Scripture. Is that an apt description? Why or why not?
It is most definitely an apt description because it's a document that formed our nation. It's what helped us become a nation to begin with.
It's certainly revered like Scripture. It sort of forms part of a secular religion that dominates American culture. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, even the Pledge of Allegiance are all ceremonies that are almost religious, but not quite.
One last follow-up. What do you think a decent respect to the opinions of mankind required when the Declaration was proclaimed? What does it require today, and why?
I think it requires representation from all over the nation instead of just from one specific area, so everybody gets like a say in what happens.
As you've seen one panel present, and now you're going to see another panel. There are 6 unit panels total. Teachers could assign the units at the beginning of the year or into the year after you have mastered the curriculum. You could have the students select the panels, though you want to make sure that they're very well balanced because each student brings their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, you may have a student that is a great research and writer, but they may not be great with public speaking, and then you have perhaps the opposite in another student. So it's important that as a teacher you know your students, that way you can present the best panel possible. Every student in the class has to be a part of a panel. So you could do it in a random fashion. You could do it in a very structured manner. Personally, I prefer as a teacher to pick my own panels, and I also ask students input. Maybe they feel comfortable with Unit 1 but not so comfortable with Unit 5, or maybe they have personality conflicts that you learn along the way as a teacher. And so there are a number of different ways that teachers could do that, but you have to make sure that every student is participating in a panel when they present. The score sheet that the judges use for the testimony is very much like a teacher rubric, and it is important to introduce this score sheet to the students as soon as possible because this score sheet will determine how they do at competition. I introduce the score sheet at the very beginning of the year, and I use it as my rubric for their unit essays. So by the time the students come to Columbus to compete, they are very familiar with the rubric. On the score sheet, there are 6 different categories that the students are scored on: understanding, constitutional application, reasoning, supporting evidence, responsiveness, and participation. They are all equally important, and as a teacher, you need to make sure that your students understand when they're answering questions, especially as a panel, because participation, all group members have to participate, and then the responsiveness, there are 3 questions that are asked, and it's important to make sure that they respond to all 3 parts of that question. So the score sheets provide feedback, and you receive them in the mail or email after the competition, so you're able to see for each unit what their strengths and weaknesses were at the competition. So if you integrate this score sheet into your classroom as soon as possible, the students will know exactly what they are being judged on when they come to testify.
Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Brad Terrace.
I'm Mariah Kearns.
And I'm Emil Surreal.
Good morning, and thank you for being here today. The doctrine of separation of powers was adopted by the Convention of 1787 not to promote efficiency, but to preclude the exercise of arbitrary power. The purpose was not to avoid friction, but to save the people from autocracy. How would you explain the doctrine of separation of powers, and what are its major features? Why did the framers believe that mere separation of powers was not enough? Why did they think the different branches would also need checks on one another? What provisions of the Constitution enable one branch to check and balance the power of another? In Federalist 48, Publius writes that power has an encroaching nature and it should be effectually restrained. After theoretically dividing the classes of power into legislative, executive, or judiciary, the next and most difficult task is to provide some practical security for each against the invasion of the others. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What evidence, historical or contemporary, can you cite to fortify your answer?
In 1787, when it was apparent that the Articles of Confederation were not working in America, a group of delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in what would later be known as the Constitutional Convention. A functional and just government was much needed after the chaos that was created by the Articles of Confederation. After their harsh experience with King George III and his tyranny, the colonists were afraid of an autocracy and a strong central government. To combat this problem, the colonists decided they would use Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers, lay down the spirit of law, which would divide the powers of the government among 3 equal branches. The Constitutional Convention was not easy and was definitely controversial, but it would lead to the United States Constitution and the substantial idea of separation of powers. The doctrine of separation of powers was added to the Constitution to promote the views of a well-balanced government. It was also added to divide the powers of the government among 3 equal branches. Article 1 of the Constitution gave Congress the legislative powers herein granted, which include making laws, raising taxes, and passing treaties. Article 2 of the Constitution gave the executive branch and the president the power to execute the law, as well as appoint foreign diplomats. Article 3 of the Constitution created the Supreme Court, which interpreted and applied the laws of the United States to the U.S. Constitution.
An example of the separation of power doctrine at work is the 1926 Supreme Court case, Myers versus the United States. Frank Myers was removed from his position as Postmaster General and argued that President Wilson needed the Senate's approval to remove him from office. However, the court stated that the executive branch had the exclusive power to remove executive branch officials without the consent of the other branches. The goal of the separation of power doctrine is to make sure that each branch has a limited amount of powers and that all the branches work together to form a great government. Although enumerating the powers of all the branches is an important factor to limiting government power, the founders believed that the branches needed checks on each other because they were afraid that a branch would try and grab too much power. The Constitution lays out certain policies in Articles 1, 2, and 3 that check the powers of all the branches. Article 1, Sections 7 and 8 allow Congress to override a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote, control the budget of the entire government, and impeach the president or members of the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court can check the power of the other branches by declaring action law unconstitutional and making it illegal. This power, called judicial review, was given to the Supreme Court in the 1803 court decision, Marbury versus Madison. The president can also check the powers of the other branches by vetoing Congress's laws and appointing judges to the Supreme Court. As a panel, we agree with Madison in Federalist 48 because we have seen examples throughout history of branches or people trying to grab power. An example of this was when FDR tried to implement the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, in which he tried to add Supreme Court judges in order to pack the court into his favor. The framers hoped that the separation of powers doctrine and checks and balances would keep the government working smoothly. In the news currently has been criticism towards the Obama administration about the NSA spying scandal. This is an example of a branch trying to grab power from the others or from the people by spying on them. The power of the national government was an interesting topic to the founders when they wrote the Constitution. They were abolishing a government that was too weak under the Articles of Confederation, but did not want to create a government that was too powerful because they had just revolted against King George III and did not want to go back to their previous problems. They managed to create a government that fit their situation perfectly and works as well as the government can. Even though we may sometimes have problems with the government, as Thomas Paine once said, government, even as the best state, is but a necessary evil.
I have a question. What experience led American colonists to believe that an imbalance of power among the different branches of government led to tyranny?
Starting with the legislative, the colonists always believed that they didn't have any say in parliament because they were 3,000 miles across the oceans and they never got represented in parliament as well as they should. So that's one in the legislative branch. In the judicial branch, they always felt like the judges were paid off by the king or by someone else, and they always made wrong decisions. And then in the executive branch, the power came from the king, which the power was given to the king by God, so they felt that it was always tyranny and no one was ever represented.
Okay, another question for you guys. How would you differentiate between checking and balancing the powers of government? Why are both checking and balancing important?
Balancing the government would be the branches, you all want them to be equal, so you want them to have an equal footing. Make sure that they all have, the same amount of power in the government, so no branch can become more powerful than the others. And if a branch does try to become more powerful, that's where checking comes in, where the other branches can sort of bring it back down to a level playing field to make sure that no branch gets greater power and creates a tyranny in the government.
An example of that is when the president commands the military, but Congress has the power to declare war on other countries. So even though he can control the military, he can't really use it for war without asking another branch for the power.
And they are both equally important because if one of the branches overpowered another, it would cause a tyranny.
What examples, historical and contemporary, can you cite of one branch of government attempting to usurp the powers of another?
As I stated in my opening statement, a historic example was when FDR tried to implement the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill in 1937, which he tried to add Supreme Court judges in order to have more decisions go into his favor and have more power. But he got shut down by Congress, of course, because of the checks and balances. A temporary now would be the NSA spying scandal, in which everyone's going crazy with the Obama administration because they believe that their power is being taken away by the executive branch.
And I also think a good example is now where we haven't had a declared war, so people feel that the executive branch is overstepping their power by sending troops into military altercations without having Congress declaring war.
Do you agree with Publius that power has an encroaching nature and it should be effectively restrained? Why and what evidence would you give?
I would agree that power does have an encroaching nature. As we've seen throughout history, when people sort of grab power, they don't like to get rid of it, as that's one of the reasons George Washington was so admired among his peers, was because he had all the power that he wanted, and he did step down from power as being the president. So I believe that, with that evidence of people admiring him because he stepped down from power, that we all realize that power does, once we get power, we like to sort of have it for as long as we can.
In what ways can citizens monitor the exercise of power by the government, and how can they act to help restrain it?
Well, the citizens have the power to have referendums and recalls to elected officials in which they can then withdraw those officials. They don't go by what they said when they were elected or really represent the people themselves. And the people also have power to see what happens in the government. Like they have C-SPAN on the TV, which they can watch all the laws and what's happening in Congress at all times. And they also have, during the newspaper, court decisions and everyday problems in the government are always posted so everybody can be updated and know what's happening.
From the beginning that I decided to utilize We the People in my classroom, the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education has helped me in many ways. I started with professional development. I came to Columbus and took a class or a workshop with a coordinator to help me understand the program that I was going to utilize. Every year, my program coordinator keeps in contact with me to see if there are any resources I need, any problems that I am facing. I get support as far as books and videos, and online there are PowerPoints that you can use along with samples to help you use within your classroom. And following the competition, they send you information on professional development opportunities to help you as a teacher within the classroom to use resources related to American history or American government. And they also give you information on professional development opportunities that are within the nation, not just within your state. So they're a great support system, and they can provide you information that you may need as you're integrating the program into your classroom. And they can also hook you up, give you information with other people that can help you. Perhaps you have a coordinator that's closer to your school that can help you. And this year they started putting the books online, so you have ebooks that can help you. But you have a support system, so if you're new or if you're not new to the program like myself, then you have somebody that is there that can help you answer any questions, point you in the right direction, give you resources, or they will find someone that can help you if they cannot.